Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel, we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Gentleman's Magazine of February 1800. And this article doesn't really have a serious title, but it is called Inoculation for the Cow-Pox Vindicated. That's what's at the top of the page anyway. So it's about the smallpox vaccine. I actually did read an article from 1768 about the smallpox inoculation, and at that time the smallpox scabs were ground to powder and blown up people's noses. And this was a technique that was invented in China and India, and they used it, it had a 2% mortality rate, which means that 2% of the people who got it would die from having smallpox. Normally it would give you like a mild form of smallpox, but over time they developed an actual vaccine, which was the Cow-Pox vaccine. This is fairly well known. Edward Jenner, I believe was his name, who discovered that milkmaids never got smallpox, ever. And it was because they often would have a very mild case of something called cowpox, which is not deadly at all. And so what he started doing is giving people cowpox in order to keep them from getting smallpox. And they were similar enough diseases that people who got cowpox didn't get smallpox. So this one is, I think, about the actual vaccine and not about the strange inoculation up the nose that they used to do. So let's see what it is. Now, the quality of the actual paper is not fantastic. It's touch hard to read. I do not have a better version than you do, so we're just gonna have to make do, yeah? Okay, Mr. Urban, February 6th. In your last, page 18, is a letter containing a severe reprobation of the institution of a cowpox hospital under the patronage of His Royal Highness the Duke of York, and the conduct of medical practitioners, among whom are some of the most eminent of this century, who it seems have nevertheless not sufficient sense to know their own interest, by committing their credit in the prosecution of a false and dangerous theory. All this reprobation is, it seems, grounded upon the presumption, it is presumption only, that it is not yet ascertained that cowpox is not a permanent preventative of the variolous contagion, and that therefore those who trust to it are liable to become in future doleful victims of experiment. To this we shall make no other reply than a plain query, to which we beg a categorical answer. Whence is it that persons who have had the cowpox 20 or even 30 years ago are now insusceptible of smallpox? We will produce such persons, will A.S. communicate the variolous disease to them. But A.S. has produced some formidable passages from the review in the British Critic of Dr. Woodville's reports and Dr. Beddoes' medical communications. I presume that A.S. will admit inaccuracy in experiment to be sufficient to overthrow the theory erected upon such experiment. If he will not admit to it, we will compel him to do so by authorities from the first philosophers known. This is quite confusing. Dr. Woodville's experiments are conducted in the smallpox hospital, and some of his patients were inoculated previously to the operation of the vaccine disease. The consequence we infer, therefore, is that the results of Dr. Woodville's trials of cowpox are equivocal, as they bear all the characteristic marks of the variolous and vaccine diseases blended. As to Dr. Beddoes' case, it has been proved in the London Medical Review and Mr. Henry Jenner's address to the public on the subject of the vaccine inoculation that the case in question is that of spurious disease. But if it were not so, cases of inoculated smallpox twice taken could be adduced. I say cases of smallpox twice taken, for it is contrary to reason and analogy that nature should have so uniformly given to every constitution such an insusceptibility of again receiving the variolous disease, that an instance should never be known to the contrary. There are now and then aberrations from her usual laws in the works of nature, at least in the living part of them. FD. The remainder of these articles is too personal from an anonymous correspondent and is foreign to the subject. Okay, so they didn't publish everything, is what they're saying. Wow, that's not at all what I was expecting. I was expecting them to be excited about this new inoculation, the vaccine, but this is like, it sounds like somebody had said that the Cow-Pox vaccine is ineffective because somebody who had it then later on got smallpox, like as a single case. Whereas they said, well, that can happen. It's not 100%. It doesn't mean it's not helpful. Yeah? So even if it's 99% effective, it's still effective. And that is quite good considering the alternative is to catch smallpox itself. So I think that is a very good point. They also specifically mentioned something on page 18, and I would really love to jump back there and see what that has to say. So one moment, I will jump back in history. Okay, so just because, there's no time limit, I'm going to go ahead and read this inoculation for the cowpox. I am a little bit surprised. So this is the original article that they were referring to. So let's find out what they have to say. Mr. Urban, B.M., January 1. No less a friend to the regular practitioners of medicine and propriety of the college, enforcing the authority entrusted to them, and which is their duty to do, than your correspondent Philomathematos, whatever numbers. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. Okay. I cannot behold without the greatest regret establishments supported by voluntary subscription for a particular purpose and committed to the care of regular physicians and apothecaries converted to scenes of quackery and experiment. What did they just say? And thus the lives of many subjects trifled with, and very probably new diseases added to the already too numerous disorders unavoidably concomitant with human nature. It has been the general custom, when any dangerous experiments were to be made, not to endanger the lives of good subjects, but to obtain the concurrence of the state to make the necessary experiments on those whose lives were become forfeited to the justice of the offended laws of their country. And this was not even done without their own concurrence and a pardon in case of recovery. This has been done in order to prove the efficacy of, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this word, styptics? Yeah? Styptics and astringents on the introduction of inoculation and in other cases which do not immediately occur to my recollection. Yet, such is the practice of our times that regular physicians are not ashamed to boast of having inoculated 600 for the cowpox in a regular established hospital. So? This is so weird. Inoculation for the smallpox, a practice most successfully established, Deo adjuvante. Sure. Thus is the good design of the subscribers both abused and counteracted, and so many subjects sent into the world under the pleasing consolation of having undergone that former scourge of human nature and ready to lend their assistance to others afflicted with that disease, which it is not yet ascertained, but they may be liable to contract and may fall a victim to. How far the court of conscience will acquit such practitioners who have thus acted without the concurrence of the college or under authority of the state must be left to their own feelings, even if they can escape the breach of the sixth commandment, of which I consider the injured laws of their country. What in the world are they talking about? I am farther much dissatisfied in seeing metallic tractors introduced into the practice of a member of the college. I will, however, venture to be so far of a quack as to recommend a practice from which I should expect superior efficacy. For the afflicted person to touch and count every metallic tractor round Bloomsbury Square, and if not sufficiently fatigued thereby, to proceed round Bedford, Queen, and the Foundling Squares until they find a good appetite for their dinner. What in the world was that about? Okay, this is what I get from this. They are very upset that people at this college of medicine have inoculated 600 people against smallpox using the Cow-Pox vaccine. They're saying that it's experimental. Dude, even if it was, isn't that better than the other inoculation? But at that point, it wasn't. Like, this was found in the 1790s, I think 1794. I'm not 100% sure. Let me go look it up. Alexa, when was the smallpox vaccine invented?
Edward Jenner developed the first successful vaccine, the smallpox vaccine, in 1798.
1798. Okay, so then it really was not long ago. Okay, my bad. I thought that it was 1794. But yeah, so then it is new. In 1800, it is brand new then. But he considers it experimental. Well, even if it is experimental, it doesn't mean it's wrong. Yeah? Like, experimental things can still be right and can still be good. And as we know today, there was definitely a good thing because it saved hundreds of thousands of millions of lives. We don't even know how many. A lot of people died of smallpox back then. It was practically pandemic, yeah? It was. It was a smallpox pandemic. And we are very lucky to not have to deal with that today. Like, I am very happy that we have our own pandemic, and it's not nearly as bad as smallpox, yeah? Like, I'll take corona anytime. Anyways, that was really interesting. The article itself was very vague, though. Like, it was not at all clear what they were talking about. Just saying, like, there's all these people falling victim. How long will the court of conscience allow this? Dude, is anybody dying of the Cow-Pox vaccine? Because I don't think they did. I'm going to look that up, too, because this is a good thing to fact-check ourselves on. Cow-Pox vaccine. Okay, history of smallpox. This is from the CDC. I think that's a pretty good, reliable source. Origin of smallpox, spread of smallpox, highlights from history. So 6th century, increased trade with China and Korea brings smallpox to Japan. 7th century, Arab expansion spread smallpox into northern Africa, Spain, and Portugal. 11th century, Crusades further spread smallpox in Europe. 15th century, Portugal occupies part of Western Africa, bringing smallpox. 16th century European settlers and the African slave trade import smallpox into the Caribbean, Central and South America. 17th century European settlers bring smallpox to North America. 18th century explorers from Great Britain bring smallpox to Australia. Awesome. So smallpox was a terrible disease. On average, 3 out of every 10 people who got it died. You had a 30% mortality rate, yeah? So the basis for vaccination began in 1796. That's what I was thinking. When the English doctor Edward Jenner noticed that milkmaids who had gotten cowpox were protected from smallpox. Jenner also knew about variolation and guessed that exposure to cowpox could be used to protect against smallpox. To test his theory, he took material from a cowpox sore on a milkmaid hand and inoculated it into the arm of James Phipps, the 9-year-old son of Jenner's gardener. Months later, Jenner exposed Phipps several times to variola virus, but Phipps never developed smallpox. More experiments followed, and in 1801, Jenner published his treatise on the origin of the vaccine inoculation. In his work, he summarized his discoveries and expressed hope that the annihilation of the smallpox, the most dreadful scourge of the human species, must be the final result of this practice. Interesting. Okay, so in 1800 then, it was very early on, so it really was experimental at the time. That's interesting. I didn't actually know the timeline of that, so that makes a little more sense on these people's reaction. So I feel like at these 2 articles that we're looking at, they are 2 articles arguing against each other. One saying this is experimental, it's too dangerous, you shouldn't do it, and the other saying it can only help. Yeah, it could only help. So, I like that. I'm going to Google really quickly mortality rate of cowpox. The case fatality rate of human cowpox may be similar to the 1 to 3% reported for controlled inoculation of smallpox virus variolation performed in the pre-Jenner days to protect against this fatal smallpox. Okay, so here we go. Cowpox from Wikipedia. Is cowpox fatal to humans? Human cases are very rare, though in 2010 a laboratory worker contracted cowpox and most often contracted from domestic cats. Human infections usually remain localized and self-limiting, but can become fatal in immunosuppressed patients. So only in high-risk people, yeah? Okay, so it's very, very low. Yeah, it is possible to be fatal, but it's not common. All right, probably as common as the flu is fatal, yeah. It's usually not. Usually you're fine. So, or I would say like chickenpox, yeah? Like kind of semi-similar to that. I think most people don't die of it. It's not very common, unless, of course, you're immunosuppressed, which is, in transplant patients, things like that. Or cancer patients, of course. So I think that, I understand the reaction on both sides, but what he was going on about metallic tractors, that was weird too. Like, I guess that was a new invention. This sounds like somebody of a certain generation, let's say, that doesn't trust new inventions and new innovations, and is very skeptical of everything that is new and modern. Whereas the second article was from someone who was much more open to change and ready to accept new ideas. So let's go back to the second article. So I guess it's the first article I read, yeah? The one who's more interested in the actual vaccine, yeah? Okay, with this perspective, I'd like to take a look at it. In your last, there's a letter containing a severe reprobation of the institution of the Cow-Pox Hospital under the patronage of His Royal Highness the Duke of York and the conduct of medical practitioners, among whom are some of the most eminent in the century, who it seems have nevertheless not sufficient sense to know their own interest by committing their credit in the prosecution of a false and dangerous theory. Okay, so this is quoting the other article, yeah? All this reprobation is, it seems, grounded upon the presumption, it is presumption only, that it is not yet ascertained that cowpox is not a permanent preventative of the variolis contagion. I actually appreciate this article because I feel like it's explaining the other one, where the other one was not at all obvious to me what they were talking about. And that therefore, those who trust to it are liable to become in future doleful victims of experiment. To this we shall make no other reply than a plain query to which we beg a categorical answer. Whence is it that persons who have had the cowpox 20 and even 30 years ago are now insusceptible to smallpox? We will produce such persons. Will A.S. communicate the variolous disease to them? But A.S. has provided some formidable passages from the review in the British Critic of Dr. Woodville's reports and Dr. Beddoes' medical communications. I presume that A.S. will not admit inaccuracy in experiment to be sufficient to overthrow the theory erected upon such experiment. If he will not admit it, he will compel him to do so by authorities from the first philosophers known. Okay. Dr. Woodville's experiments were conducted in the smallpox hospital, and some of his patients were inoculated previous to the operation of the vaccine disease. The consequence, we infer, therefore, is that the results of Dr. Woodhouse's trials of cowpox are equivocal, as they bear all the characteristic marks of the variolous and vaccine diseases blended. As to Beddoes' case, it has been proved in the London Medical Review and in Mr. Henry Jenner's address to the public on the subject of the vaccine inoculation that the case in question is that of spurious disease. If it were not so, cases of the inoculated smallpox twice taken could be adduced. I say cases of smallpox twice taken, for it is contrary to reason and analogy that nature should have so uniformly given to every constitution such an insusceptibility of again receiving the variolous disease, that they should never be known to the contrary. There are now and then aberrations from usual laws in all the works of nature, at least in the living part of them, F.D. This makes more sense after reading the other. I appreciated it the second time around a little more. Yeah, like, I think that he's saying, dude, it is not impossible that somebody who was vaccinated got smallpox. We never said that it was 100% effective. We said that it was very effective. 99% is very effective. So if 600 people vaccinated, if 6 people got smallpox, but the other 594 did not, then it is very effective. And are we not happy about this? You know, it's much better than getting smallpox itself. So, yeah. And they also said that Dr. Jenner himself also spoke and mentioned that this was a singular case. Like, this is a case of smallpox that happened after inoculation. I didn't say that it couldn't happen. It's just not likely. But that doesn't mean that it's not effective and that this is necessarily experimental, even though it was still in the phase of, I guess you could call it experimental because it's in the phase of confirmation, yeah? Trying to confirm that it is a viable way of preventing smallpox in the future. And it turned out to be very effective, and it was one of the most effective early vaccines that there was, yeah? So if I had lived then, I totally would have been like, okay, I want the vaccine. But that's because I'm like that today, you know? I know that I am like that, so. Anyway, I am very, very grateful to Dr. Jenner for inventing vaccines. Thank you, Dr. Jenner. We really appreciate you. Thank you for watching our Microfiche time capsule today. I hope you enjoyed it. So be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.